Welcome to another installment of D&December. One of the things I actually get asked or requested a lot is, how exactly do you make a character? Like, what are the actual steps? How do you go through and do it? So, why don't we do it together? Right here, right now, we are going to make a brand new Dungeons & Dragons character. And if you want to follow along with me, all you really need is your character sheet. If you happen to have the player's handbook, that can be useful as well. Otherwise, you can get the character sheet along with the basic rules off of the official Dungeons & Dragons website from Wizards. Easily download and print it off, and you can follow it along. So, let's do that. Let's start off with a character name. I mean, normally it's better off to think of a name after you have picked a nice race for your character, but we'll do things a little bit out of order since this is going to be your character. We'll name him YouTube Common. So this is YouTube Comment. Should we start with a race or ability scores? Well, again, you can go either way. Let's start off with picking a race. Like, we have we don't have a class yet, but let's think of a race. We'll make a dwarf character. So under race, we'll write down dwarf. Now, we'll be starting off at level 1, so make it as clean as possible. We'll start off at level 1. Rather than picking a class right away, why don't we figure out the ability scores of our dwarf, and then we can pick a class from that. Now, you don't have to do it this way. Like, if you know you want to make them a dwarven barbarian, you can, but we'll go from there. Now, we're going to determine the ability scores. The ability scores being strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. There are many ways to do this. For example, you can roll dice. There's also the point buy system where you start off with so many points and you just attribute them to the different ability scores until you run out of points. There are many different ways of doing this, but for the sake of the most variety, we'll be doing the rolling the dice way. So what I have here is 4 6-sided die, or 4d6, and we're just going to roll these 6 times, and each way taking away the lowest die. So we're going to roll that 6 times until we got 6 totals, and after that, we'll give those to our different ability scores. So let's roll those. Not a bad start. Just take away the lowest, and I'll write that down until I've got 6 different results. All right, not bad. So before I want to put these in, I want to think of a decent class. That way I have an idea of where I can put these ability scores that will help the class the best, while also making for an interesting character. Let's do something a little unorthodox for this dwarf. What do you think of dwarves? What are they usually? Fighters, barbarians, kind of upfront, meatier fighters. Let's just do something weird. Let's say our dwarf, YouTube Common, is a druid. So he'll be a dwarf of the forest at level 1. Not very common, and maybe we can think of a story as to why our dwarf loves the forest instead of the mountains or the hills or the underground instead, but let's worry about our scores first. So I've got all these different ability scores, and I just need to put them in. What's the most important ability score for druids? Well, according to our player's handbook, it's going to be wisdom. So let's put our highest score into wisdom. So we got that 16. We'll write that into there. Afterwards, what else would help him? He's going to be a very, very learned person. He's going to know a lot about the forest. But he also is let's make a very kind druid. Like, yeah, he loves the forest, but he is able to talk with animals very well, but can also talk with people. Let's give him 15 charisma. That way it's easier for him to converse with the different folk. Now, I'd imagine as a bizarre wood dwarf that he'll probably end up using a lot of ranged weapons. He may not be much of an upfront fighter since he loves the forest. Maybe he hunts more than anything else. So since he'll be using a lot of ranged weapons, let's actually give him a higher dexterity than normal. So we got that 14, we can place that into dexterity, and that leaves us just a few more scores left. We can put that 11 into, let's say, constitution. So put 11 there, and that gives us 2 more, 12 and 9. Now this is actually really interesting to us because the 9 gives us a -1 modifier. That's not a great score. But we can make this part of our dwarven character. We actually make it part of his character. As I've said before last year, when it comes to making cool characters, you don't necessarily need to make the best possible character, you just need to make interesting ones. So for our dwarf, how about the fact that because he lives in the woods and has been up above ground for so long that he doesn't have like the kind of the muscle that a lot of other dwarves have. He's not working the mines, he's not doing a bunch of stone cutting, and because of that, his arms and body has weakened over the time. So let's actually give him a strength of 9. That way his intelligence is then 12. That kind of justifies his ability scores and puts it into his character. Because, you know, if I made him a dwarven druid that had 17 strength, you could find a way to justify that, but I think this makes for a more interesting character. Now, our ability scores aren't completely done yet. Yes, we've put these all in here, but our character is a dwarf. And because of that, his dwarven heritage affects his ability scores. If you actually look into the player's handbook, it says that the dwarven traits increases your constitution score by 2. So that 11 that I put in for constitution is instead a 13. So now we actually got a pretty decent looking dwarf. All right, not bad. So now that we know our dwarf, we'll know that he won't be much of a front range fighter by any means, but he's pretty decent everywhere else. So let's continue on to the rest of our character sheet. In the upper left area, you see Proficiency Bonus, and this is a bonus that applies to your rolls of things your character is proficient in. And your character can be proficient in different skills, different spell casting, saving throws, weapon attacks, etc. So this is a sort of universal bonus that can be added to a lot of different things. And at level 1, our proficiency bonus is +2, so we can write that in there as well. Let's go down to our saving throws. Saving throws are your ways to resist any kind of danger. For example, a boulder trying to crush you could be a strength saving throw, or something trying to take over your mind would be a wisdom saving throw. And your saving throw modifiers are based off of your ability scores. The ones we just did, strength, dexterity, constitution, etc. So we can use those to figure out what our saving throws are. Druids are proficient in intelligence and wisdom saving throws. So we can mark those little dots so that we know that's the ones that he's proficient in, which means not only does he add your ability score modifier to your saving throw, but you also get to add in that proficiency bonus. So with that, we can write down all of our saving throw totals. So aside from strength, we're pretty resistant to everything. Not too bad for a dwarven druid. Our next table that we want to fill out is the skills table, which is also over on the left-hand side. These are different skills that your character is capable of. Now you can do any one of these skills, but you get to select a couple of them to be proficient in, which adds in your proficiency bonus. So we get to choose 2 skills from, our options are Arcana, Animal Handling, Insight, Medicine, Nature, Perception, Religion, and Survival. And we can do any 2 of those. Well, some of them seem more obvious than not. For example, since our dwarf is a druid, I think Survival would be a stellar choice since he's out of his element. He's had to learn how to survive in the woods, so let's actually make him proficient in Survival. Now, naturally, you think druids, you would think nature, but let's make him a little more interesting. How about the fact that because he's a dwarf, that he's from that mountain in the hills, he's actually not great at knowing a whole lot about nature yet. Like that's what he wants. That's what he wants to get to, but he's not there yet. So let's not pick nature. Instead, pick something else. How about, say, animal handling? Maybe that's what drove him to the forest in the first place, is the fact that he just loves animals. He may not know much about plants and trees, but he knows animals. So let's do animal handling. Now with those 2 chosen, we can then figure out all of our different skills. And they actually have the ability score bonus written right next to them in case you're wondering. So for example, acrobatics is based off of dexterity, so we have a +2 to our acrobatics checks. Animal handling is based off of wisdom, which would be 3, but because we chose to be proficient in it, we get to add in our proficiency bonus, giving us a +5 to animal handling skills. And then you can go forward and do that for each and every one of the skills afterwards until you've got the whole table filled out. And with those filled out, let's learn a little bit more about YouTube Common, our dwarf. We can look at the background and the alignment for our dwarf. Now, alignment is your character's alignment is your character's general attitude towards the world. good, evil, chaotic, lawful, or anywhere in between. And our dwarf is generally going to be a good person, so let's make him the good alignment. But because he's made himself a person of the forest, he's not really in a society at all. I see no reason for him to be lawful, and I don't really see him to be all that selfish either. So let's make him neutral good. And with that, you would then get to choose a background. Now, backgrounds are a way to customize your character, and there's a bunch of pre-built backgrounds within the player's handbook. There's lots that you can choose from. Feel free to choose any one of those. I personally prefer just making my own background and working with my dungeon master and just creating my own background rather than using a preset one. But for the sake of this video, we'll be using one of these. Perfect. I actually know exactly what background we want to do. There's one called the Hermit. You lived in seclusion, either in a sheltered community or such as a monastery, or entirely alone for a formative part of your life. And that's basically what's happened to our Dwarven Druid. He made himself a hermit of the forest. So thanks to being a hermit, we do get a couple of different bonuses from that. For example, being a hermit gives us skill proficiencies in medicine and religion. So we can go back to our skill table and become proficient in medicine and religion, giving us another +2 to both of those rolls, so we can update that. It also gives us proficiency in an herbalism kit, so that we can actually work with different flowers and things to make concoctions or potions or natural healing. Although we may not be great at it since, our nature skill, we aren't proficient in that, but we can still add that to our other proficiencies table down in the lower left of the character sheet, along with our languages. Everyone knows Common, so we'll know that language, and of course being a dwarf, we'll know Dwarven, and then we can pick one more language after that. How about something weird like Fae? Just speaks Fae in case he finds any sprites or pixies of the forest, you can talk with them. Other information that you can include is all things in the upper right hand corner of the character sheet: personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. Again, there are tables within the player's handbook that allow you to randomly choose them or pick one out if you wish. I'll leave that up to you. Maybe you can come up with your own flaws for YouTube comment, or maybe he's got some own bonds or ideals that to discover, and that'll be up to you. I'll leave that up to you. So before we move on, we have a few other things that we do need to take care of. Let's look over at the top center of our character sheet, where we can see things like hit points, initiative, and speed. Now, for our current hit points, at level 1, you automatically get the maximum possible. And for druids, that's 8. Every level, they would gain 1d8 hit points, or one 8-sided die. But because we're level 1, we'll automatically get 8. Then we also add our Constitution modifier on top of that. Our Constitution is 13, which means our modifier is +1, so we would start off with 9 maximum hit points. Down below that it says hit dice. This is important for resting and trying to heal. Our hit die is a d8 because you roll an 8-sided die every time you level up for more hit points, and we're only at level 1, so we got one of those. So for hit dice, we have a total of 1 d8. Your initiative is what you roll to help determine what turn you go in combat, and your initiative bonus is determined entirely on your dexterity. And thankfully, YouTube Comment's a little more dexterous than both, so his initiative bonus is +2. The +2 coming from his dexterity modifier. Speed is how far you can move on your turn in combat. Now, unfortunately, we're a dwarf, so our legs aren't as long as others, so we don't have as much speed. Dwarves have a base speed of 25 feet, so we can write that in there. You could think that sucks that our speed is lower than others, but with such a low strength, we don't plan on being an upfront fighter, so maybe it's not so bad. We're almost done, but we still need to purchase equipment for our Dwarven Hermit. Even though he lives in the forest, he still has a few belongings. Maybe these are things he bought before he left his dwarven town. So for the starting money for druids, we get to roll 2 4-sided die, or 2d4, add those together, and then multiply it by 10. 4 and a 3 is 7 times 10, so we will have 70 gold pieces, I will write that down, to use to purchase equipment, which is quite a bit. So we need to think of things such as armor, weapons, maybe we need like food or a backpack, or maybe a sleeping bag since you're gonna be out in the forest. These are all things important to consider. And you can find all of these things within the equipment chapter of the player's handbook. So for armor, let's go with something light Since he is a druid, he's limited to the kind of armor he wears. Let's just give him some studded leather armor, and that already costs 45 gold pieces. That's most of his money right there. Now you can also see on the armor table that studded leather armor gives us an armor class of 12 plus our dexterity modifier. So if we go back to the top center of our character sheet real quick, right next to hit points and initiative, it says what our armor class is, which would be 12 plus our dexterity modifier, which is a +2, for a total of an armor class of 14, which means anytime someone attacks us, they need to roll a 14 or a better to hit. Now we need to pick some weapons for you to become. Now, the problem is, as a druid, his weapon pool is going to be very, very limited. Druids don't like using a whole lot of metal or steel weapons, but we do have a few options. Since our strength is lower, let's try to avoid giving him a melee weapon. Instead, think of things that we can use for range. His options include things such as slings or javelins, which I actually like the idea of that. How about we just have this druid forest hermit that's a dwarf who throws javelins at people. So let's give him a bunch of javelins to throw. How about we'll purchase 8 javelins, and those cost 5 silver pieces each for a total of 4 gold pieces. So we can mark off that gold, and we can mark off in our equipment that we have 8 javelins. And if for some reason someone does get up on his face, we can give him a melee weapon. Since he's using javelins, spears are pretty close to the same, so let's have him have a backup spear as well. So let's mark down a spear and mark out that 1 GP that it cost. Now, since we have these weapons, we should mark down our different attacks with them so that we can quickly look up what exactly our bonuses are when we attack with them. In the center of the character sheet is the attacks and spell casting area, and this is where we can actually write down our different attacks and bonuses for the spear and the javelin. So in the first box, we'll write down javelin, which can be thrown, and its attack bonus. Well, the attack bonus would be our dexterity, because this is a ranged weapon, you add a dexterity bonus to it, and javelins are something that we're proficient in, so we add those together. Our dexterity modifier is +2, our proficiency bonus is +2. Therefore, we have a +4 to hit with javelins. And for its damage, it says within the player's handbook that it deals 1d6 piercing damage, but since it's a thrown ranged weapon, we also get to add our dexterity to the damage as well. So it's going to be 1d6 +2, the +2 coming from our dexterity modifier. You don't add your proficiency bonus to damage, just the 2 hit roll. And then we can also make a little note here that it has a range of 30 feet or 120 feet for a long range attack. Then we can add in our spear, and since that's going to be a melee weapon, we're going to be using our strength instead of dexterity, which is a -1. But we are proficient in spears, so we can add that to it instead, so our spear attack will be a +1 to hit total. Now, spears are kind of a special weapon because normally they do 1d6 piercing, but they're also known as versatile weapons, which means you can use them with 2 hands. And if someone comes up within their face of our dwarf, I think it's going to be our best bet to use it with 2 hands. So normally it's a 1d6 piercing weapon, but with the versatility of using 2 hands, that brings it up to 1d8. Now we're still using our strength because we are trying to stab someone with it, and our strength's not the best. So at the end, our total damage is going to be 1d8 -1. Now there's a bunch of other equipment and things that you can buy, like I mentioned earlier. Food, backpacks, bed rolls, torches, lanterns, etc. But I'll leave that up to you. The only other thing we really need to do on our druid, which this doesn't apply to all characters, but just for a druid, is we do need to determine its spells. As a druid, you automatically know 2 cantrips at level 1, and these are completely minor spells that you can just cast at will. And then for your level 1 spells, where you actually get to the good stuff, you get spells equal to 1, your level, plus your wisdom modifier of spells. So at level 1, we know 4 different druid spells that we can cast, a total of 2 level 1 spells per day. So we can just go to our player's handbook and just pick some spells. So for our cantrips, how about we know a poison spray and thorn whip. And for level 1, we'll have 2 slots, which means we can cast 2 level 1 spells per day. And we'll know the spells. Again, thinking of our character, we decided that he's really into animals, and that's why he became a hermit of the forest. So we'll keep that in mind when choosing his spells. So he'll have animal friendship, speak with animals, fog cloud, and jump. So now that we have our 4 spells selected, what this means is that you can cast any one of these 4 spells twice per day. That could be 2 jumps or 1 jump and a speak with animals or whatever combination. And this ability will increase as we level up. Now before we move on from here, we are going to go to the top of this spellcasting sheet where it says your spellcasting ability and your spell save DC. Your spellcasting ability is all dependent on your class. For druids, it's wisdom. So you can write down wisdom in the spellcasting ability. Spell save DC and spell attack bonus is what you would use to determine if your spells actually affects the target, whether they resist it or if you actually hit with the spell in the first place. So spell save DC, the way we determine that is it's always going to be 8 plus your proficiency bonus plus your spellcasting ability. So at level 1, it's going to be 8 plus the 2 of our current proficiency bonus plus our spellcasting ability modifier of wisdom, which is +3. So 8 plus 2 plus 3. So our current spell save DC is 13. So if we say cast a charm spell on someone or a poison or whatever, they need to resist with a roll of 13 or better. Spell attack bonus is what you'd use to actually hit. Kind of like our weapons where you have like a 2-hit bonus with your weapons. This is kind of the same thing, but for spells. And for this, it's your proficiency bonus plus your spellcasting modifier ability score. Spell attack bonus would be proficiency bonus of 2 plus our wisdom ability score modifier of +3, so we have a total of +5 to hit with our ranged spells. Now there's a lot more things to clean up on the character sheet, but again, I'll leave that up to you. You can choose additional languages, additional equipment. There's a lot of features and traits of your different class and race that still need to be put in there. For example, because we're a druid, we know the druid language. Because we're a dwarf, we have special dwarven resistances and special training, etc. So make sure you go back through the character book and look through that and really see the other bonuses and proficiencies that your character will get, and keep that in mind as you create your own. So with that, we more or less have our very own Dungeons & Dragons character, a dwarven druid who lives in the forest because he loves animals, but it's also made him weak over time, and his name is Yutukamen. There you go. I hope this was insightful and helped you learn a little bit more about how to make D&D characters, and you can see how fun it can be with coming up with different ideas and different character types. With that, thank you guys so very much for watching, and stay tuned for more D&December.